The mediator asked me to state my name for the record, and that's when my husband of 19 years, leaned over to his lawyer and whispered something that made them both smile. I saw it. The mediator didn't. I told myself to breathe. I told myself I had the documents. I told myself that the truth was sitting right there in the manila folder on the table in front of me, and that all I had to do was get through the next few hours without falling apart. I almost made it. My name is Evelyn. I'm 52 years old, and I spent the better part of 2 decades building a life in Guelph, Ontario with a man I genuinely believed was my partner. We met when I was 33, at a Canada Day barbecue at a mutual friend's place in the Glebe neighborhood of Ottawa. He was tall, easy to talk to, the kind of man who remembers how you take your coffee after the first time you tell him. His name was Marcus. We got married the following summer at a small ceremony in Prince Edward County. My sister flew in from Vancouver. His parents drove up from Niagara Falls. It was nothing fancy. A farm venue, white string lights, a playlist we'd argued about for 3 weeks. I wore my grandmother's pearl earrings. Marcus cried when I walked down the aisle. I remember thinking, this is the person I'm going to grow old with. I was right about growing old. I was wrong about everything else. For most of our marriage, I worked as a registered nurse at Guelph General Hospital. Cardiac ward, then ICU, then eventually a supervisory role I'd spent 8 years earning. Marcus worked in commercial real estate, which meant his income went up and down like a tide depending on the market. Mine was steady. Mine paid the mortgage during the years his commissions dried up. Mine covered the RRSP contributions we made in both our names because our financial advisor, a careful, methodical man named Gerald, said it made sense from a tax perspective. Mine. I didn't think of it that way at the time. But I think about it now. The first sign that something was wrong with me physically came in the winter of my 49th year. I remember it clearly because it happened during a night shift, right around 2 in the morning, when the floor was quiet. I was reading a chart at the nursing station and I noticed my left hand was trembling. Not dramatically, just a faint, persistent tremor, like a phone vibrating on a table. I put the chart down and pressed my hand flat against the desk until it stopped. I told myself I was tired. Over the next several months, the symptoms grew. Fatigue that sleep didn't fix. Intermittent pain in my lower back and hips that moved around, never quite settling, never responding to the ibuprofen I took like it was candy. Brain fog on my worst days. The kind where you stand in the middle of the kitchen knowing you came in there for something, but the word for the thing has simply disappeared. I'm a nurse. I know what brain fog looks like in patients. Recognizing it in yourself is a different experience entirely. I went to my family doctor in March. She ran blood work, found nothing alarming, suggested stress. I went back in June with the same symptoms and some new ones. Tingling in my feet, fatigue that was now affecting my work. She referred me to a neurologist. The neurologist had a 4-month wait time. I waited. Marcus, during this period, was patient in the way people are patient when they don't really believe there's anything wrong. He'd ask how I was feeling in the same tone you ask someone about their commute. Politely, with the underlying assumption that the answer will be fine. When the answer wasn't fine, he'd go quiet. Not unkind exactly, just absent, like he'd left the room without moving. His mother, Patricia, was less subtle. My mother-in-law had always been a woman with opinions about how other people should run their lives. She lived about 40 minutes away in Cambridge, and she made that drive with surprising regularity. Usually without calling ahead. She had a key. We'd given it to her years ago, during a period when she'd been having her kitchen renovated and needed somewhere to store things. She never gave it back and we never asked. In the early months of my illness, Patricia started showing up more. I'd come home from a day shift, exhausted, feet aching, and find her in my kitchen, reorganizing my cupboards or making comments about the dust on the baseboards. She never said anything cruel directly. It was always the phrasing, "You should really let Marcus handle the finances while you're not feeling well." Or, "I hope you're not pushing yourself too hard at work, Evelyn. It wouldn't be fair to the patients." That one landed like a fist. I talked to Marcus about the key. He said I was being sensitive. He said his mother was just trying to help. He said, and I remember this sentence exactly, because I wrote it down that night in the notebook I kept on my nightstand. "You've always had a hard time accepting help from people, Ev." I had run our household, managed our finances, worked full-time through 2 recessions and a pandemic, and apparently the thing I struggled with was accepting help. The neurologist appointment finally came in November. I sat in his office on a cold Tuesday afternoon with a printout of all my symptoms, organized chronologically, because I am a nurse and that is what we do. He was a kind man, Dr. Brennan, and he took his time. He ordered an MRI and additional blood panels, including a complete autoimmune workup. The results took 3 weeks. I have a connective tissue disorder, hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, or HEDS. It's genetic, it's lifelong, and it explains every single symptom I'd been documenting for the past 2 years. The tremor, the fatigue, the joint pain that moved and shifted, the dysautonomia that made me dizzy when I stood up too quickly. It's not curable, but it's manageable. With physiotherapy, medication, lifestyle adjustments, and a care team that actually knows what they're looking at. I cried in Dr. Brennan's office, not because the news was devastating, because it was real, because I hadn't been imagining it. Because I had been right about my own body this entire time, and for 2 years the people closest to me had been making me doubt that. I came home and told Marcus. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Well, it's not like it changes anything." I think that was the moment the marriage ended, even though the paperwork took another 1.5 years. Things shifted after the diagnosis. Or maybe they'd always been shifting and I only now had the clarity to see it. Marcus began spending more evenings at the office. Commercial real estate apparently requiring a great deal of late-night attention. He began handling his phone differently, angling it away from me, taking calls in the garage. We stopped eating dinner together. We stopped talking about anything that mattered. I started paying closer attention to our finances. We had a joint account for household expenses and 2 individual accounts for personal spending. We also had a joint investment portfolio through Gerald and 2 TFSAs in our individual names. What I found, when I actually sat down and went through 14 months of statements that spring, took me the better part of a week to fully understand. Marcus had been transferring money. Not in large amounts. Nothing that would trigger an automatic flag. $2,000 here, $1,500 there. Sometimes 1,000. Always to an account I didn't recognize, always timed to coincide with periods when I'd been unwell and less likely to be scrutinizing the statements. Over 14 months, he'd moved just over $68,000 out of our joint account. I didn't confront him. A colleague of mine, a woman named Diane who'd been through her own divorce 3 years earlier, had told me once, "The moment they know, they move faster than you can." I called a family lawyer instead. Her name was Ms. Okafor. She was calm and precise and she told me to gather everything. I gathered everything. It was Ms. Okafor who told me that in Ontario, the process for dividing family property upon separation requires full financial disclosure from both parties. Marcus would have to account for every dollar. And the $68,000 he'd quietly moved, along with the account he'd moved it to, which turned out to be registered solely in his name, would be part of that accounting. Marcus hired a lawyer too, once I filed. His name was a man named Hutchings, and he had the energy of someone who'd won a lot of arguments on technical grounds. From the first meeting, his approach was clear. Discredit me. Not my finances, not my legal standing, but me. My reliability, my mental state, my health. In mediation, Hutchings submitted a letter from Patricia, my mother-in-law, describing a series of incidents in which I had allegedly acted erratically due to my condition. She listed dates. She listed specifics. She said I had once become confused and agitated during a family dinner, and that Marcus had repeatedly tried to get me proper care, but I had refused. She said my illness had affected my capacity to manage our household, and that many of the financial decisions during our marriage had been made unilaterally by Marcus to compensate for my limitations. I read that letter 3 times. I had attended that family dinner. I had made a green bean casserole. I had been tired, yes, because I'd worked a 12-hour shift the day before, but I had been fully present, fully coherent, and fully aware that Patricia had not touched the casserole and had instead talked for 45 minutes about a renovation she was planning. I was not confused. I was bored. Ms. Okafor told me not to respond emotionally to the letter. She told me to respond with documentation. So I did. I had my medical records. Every appointment, every test result, every referral letter, every prescription. I had Dr. Brennan's written assessment of my condition, which included a clear statement that HEDS does not impair cognitive function and that his patient, me, was fully capable of making her own financial and legal decisions. I had my employment records from Guelph General, showing consistent performance reviews, no disciplinary actions, a promotion to nursing supervisor 18 months after my diagnosis. I had 19 years of joint tax returns showing that I had been the primary income earner for 11 of those years. And I had Gerald. Gerald had been our financial advisor for 12 years. He's a quiet, methodical man, the kind who keeps paper files in addition to digital ones and who prints confirmation letters for every transaction. When Ms. Okafor reached out to him, he didn't hesitate. He came to the mediation session prepared. He brought 12 years of records. Marcus's lawyer had built his case on the idea that Marcus had been quietly managing our finances during periods when I was too unwell to do so, that the transfers were not misconduct but rather reasonable consolidation of household funds under challenging circumstances. He said it with confidence. He said it with footnotes. Gerald set his binder on the table, opened it to the first flagged page and began to speak. He went through the transfers one by one. He showed the dates, the amounts, the destination account. He showed that the destination account had been opened solely in Marcus's name 4 months before I received my diagnosis. Before, not after. He showed that the transfer amounts had increased in frequency following my diagnosis, not decreased. He showed that the account had been used to purchase, among other things, a deposit on a condominium in Burlington that Marcus had not disclosed in his financial statement. The room was very quiet. Hutchings tried to reframe. Gerald waited patiently until he was done, then said in the mildest possible tone, "I've been doing this for 31 years. I know what financial disclosure requires, and I know what these records show." Marcus was looking at the table. Patricia, who had been allowed to sit in the hallway during breaks, was not in the room. But Marcus was, and I watched the exact moment the strategy collapsed on him. He'd been leaning slightly forward the whole session, that posture people have when they think they're winning. And then Gerald put the condo deposit document on the table, and Marcus sat back. Just like that, leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling. I'd spent 2 years doubting myself. I'd spent those same 2 years being told, in 100 small ways, that I wasn't reliable, wasn't sharp, wasn't well enough to be trusted with my own life. And I sat there in that mediation room and I felt something settle into place in my chest. Not triumph, just clarity. The kind you stop reaching for after a while because you've given up expecting it. And then it shows up anyway. I thought about every night shift I'd worked through joint pain and fatigue. Every patient I'd advocated for when no one else was listening. Every time I'd pushed back on a physician who dismissed a symptom as psychosomatic. Because I knew what the research said, and I'd learned that knowing things matters even when knowing is exhausting. I had done that for my patients for decades. I hadn't done it enough for myself. Ms. Okafor filed for full financial disclosure and a court order to freeze the Burlington condo deposit pending property division. The judge granted it within the week. There is a provision under Ontario's Family Law Act for unjust enrichment. The legal principle that one spouse cannot benefit financially from undisclosed transfers of family property. Hutchings spent 2 weeks trying to argue that the transfers were legitimate. He had fewer footnotes the second time around. The court found that the $68,000 in transfers, plus the undisclosed condo deposit of $32,000, constituted improper dissipation of family assets. Marcus was required to account for the full amount in the property equalization calculation. He did not go to jail. I know that frustrated some of the people in my life who heard what he'd done. My sister, when I told her, said, "That's it? He just has to pay it back?" And I understand that instinct, I do. But what civil family law gives you is not punishment, it's restoration. And what was restored to me in the end was not just a financial calculation, it was the record. There is something about having a legal document that says, the money was here, it was moved without disclosure, and that was wrong. It's not a dramatic verdict. It doesn't make for a satisfying movie scene, but it exists. It has Marcus's name on it and mine, and it says in formal language that what he did happened and that I was right about it. Patricia sent me an email 2 weeks after the settlement. It was 4 sentences long. It said she hoped I would take care of myself, that she had always thought I was a capable woman despite everything, and that she wished things had turned out differently. I did not reply. My colleague Diane took me out for dinner at a restaurant in downtown Guelph the week the settlement was finalized. We ordered the tasting menu and split a bottle of Niagara Peninsula Riesling and talked for 4 hours. At some point she said, "You knew the whole time, didn't you, that something was off?" "Yes," I said. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" I thought about it. I thought about standing at that nursing station at 2 in the morning, with my trembling hand pressed flat against the desk. I thought about all the years of telling myself I was tired. I was sensitive. I was not the kind of woman who made accusations without being certain. Because I kept waiting to be more sure, I said. I kept thinking I needed more evidence. More proof. More I don't know. Permission. Diane refilled my glass. You didn't need permission, she said. You just needed time. I'm not going to tell you I've healed completely. I have good days and harder ones. My head's is managed now. I have a physiotherapist I see every 2 weeks, a cardiologist who monitors the dysautonomia, a GP who actually reads my charts before I walk in the door. I work 3 days a week instead of 5, which was a grief in its own right, but I've made peace with it. I still wear my grandmother's pearl earrings sometimes. Not on any particular occasion. Just when I want to remind myself of the woman I was before I started apologizing for what my body couldn't do. I live alone now in a smaller place on the west side of Guelph, with a garden I'm slowly learning to manage, and a cat named Biscuit who has no opinions about my finances and demands very little except breakfast at a reasonable hour. It is quieter than I expected. It is also, most days, exactly enough. If there is anything I want to say, to anyone who is sitting where I once sat, reading their bank statements late at night, and wondering if they're imagining things, or lying in a doctor's waiting room, trying to explain symptoms that keep getting dismissed, or just feeling, in some low and persistent way, that the people who are supposed to believe them don't. Trust the thing you know. Document everything. Find the Geralds and the Ms. Okafors and the Dianes. And understand that waiting to be more sure is not the same as being wrong now. You are probably not wrong now. The truth has a way of sitting very patiently. It was sitting in Gerald's binder for 12 years. It was sitting in Dr. Brennan's files. It was sitting in my own careful, exhausted, stubborn hands. In every symptom I logged, every statement I saved, every piece of paper I refused to throw away even when I didn't know yet that I would need it. It was there. It was always there. I just had to stop doubting that I was the right person to carry it.